I'm Chris Vik, I'm the developer of Spectral ONE. Now the Spectral ONE is a collection of visual devices for MaxforLive in the World collection, which is distributed and has a couple other packs on the Isotonic Studios website, so you can check it out there if you haven't. So what I'm going to do is step through a couple of the devices. First I'm going to step through all of the devices, but I'm going to start with one at a time, and we're going to try and keep this video to under 10 minutes. So I can show you guys a couple of looks that each of the devices will get you. So I'm using the stems from the track that are actually supplied with the pack, and that's the Woolg Sedna Wen, which is on his Tiny Moon EP. So I've got all the stems. There's a bass line, a couple of melodies, and a couple of drums, and I've sort of laid all them out in the arranger view here. And we're just going to try out and see what the devices look like on these different channels. So all I've done at the moment is dropped in a world viewer, and I've actually opened it up. I've just changed a couple of these palettes to give a couple of different looks, and let's start by dropping a proceed onto your drums 1 channel, and I'll move the window up here so you can see what's happening. So I will just isolate this channel. Okay, so we're getting this kind of reactive, strange looking object. Let's just turn this off. Alrighty. So it looks 2D at the moment, but if we change the rotation of this, we can just type it in here, or we can drag it up and down. Now it's pointing up and down. Let's go make it so it loops around this particular part. Oops. Okay. So you can see it's a 3D object that is dancing around to the transients of the audio. You can change the standard settings, like the depth, which changes the position of it in 3D space, the position. You can change the gain, which changes how much audio is going into that object, and then slide, which basically smooths the movement of it based on the transient inputs. The dimensions basically simplifies the object when you bring it down and make it look a lot sharper instead of circular or spherical. If I bring it up, it'll give it more vertices, which will mean that it looks more mushroom-like, or I guess like a smoother, rounder object. So you can play with those settings to get different looks. The shape changes how many. There's basically a geometric shape that's being algorithmically calculated and created. So as you reduce the number of positions that it's generated from, you can get interesting little looks from simplifying the object all the way up to very complex objects, which are again more spherical and less jagged, I suppose. There's sort of a sweet spot in there though. Scale just changes the size of it on different axes, like all the other objects in the world collection. And then you can change the draw mode like other ones, but I'll show you what this does in this particular instance. So we can go point, which will draw this object out of points, and you can see as I increase the dimensions in this particular slider, it'll add more of these circular parts that the object's drawn from, and that just basically makes the object more complex. And as I draw the dimensions down on this, you'll see that it makes out of less of these circles. So I can increase the dimensions on that axis, and I'll basically increase how many vertices there are around each of these circles. And likewise, when I drag it down, it simplifies that shape. So you can get very complex shape like this, adding all the vertices, and you can sort of see what happens as I change the shape setting when it's drawn like this. Change it to line, and it simply just draws lines between each of the vertices. In line mode, you can change the width of those lines, and it's likewise when you're in triangle or square mode and you've got it set to mesh mode, you can change the line width there. So let's have a look at the settings for the modulation. So modulation can be constant, so you can basically sort of writhes around to the transients, but it also just writhes around at a constant level, and you can change that speed here. You can also set it to trigger mode, which basically over here there's a threshold that you can see, this little white thing dancing around the outside. That's your audio level and how much the audio is changing, and then the little trigger lights flashing whenever that threshold gets crossed. So you can set that to a particular level in order to get the motion of the object happening when the particular transients get to a level that you're interested in modulating it from. And you can change how much or how fast that trigger makes the modulation of the shape and how long the modulation happens for. You can play around with these settings depending on what what look or effect you're trying to get. Will depend on obviously what settings you'll set this to. So have a play. Then you've got sync, which just modulates it every. You can either do sync rate, so every 16th modulate on that beat, or you can set it to time and modulate it by milliseconds instead of synchronization. Then you can change lighting, so let's pop it back into solid mode and then set lighting on. You can see it just sets shadows on, so the lighting causes it to have shadows. And I mean, that's useful if you want to get particular looks in the whole scene that you're using. So you might use lighting for all your other objects and you might want it to look the same as those objects, so you can do all the rotations. And then this one here changes the shape that it modulates over. So I'll turn lighting off, and it just slightly changes the way that it modulates through the center. So you can just click that and it'll randomize that movement pattern. So then, like all the other objects, I've got a motorcycle driving past, like all the other objects, you can modulate the rotations. You can turn the speed up and then click that to turn it on, and then it'll slowly modulate around a particular axis. And likewise with all the axes, you can do the same. And let's set it to Y mode, mesh mode, and change the speed. So then some other looks you can get out of it. Let's go back into the world viewer, and there's some effects here which you can play with, which will sort of change the look of it a little bit. Things like feedback and collide is a good one. That basically makes a nice kind of kaleidoscope looking geometric shape. And let's bring the whole track back in. Turn modulation off. Like quite a responsive looking object here if I just turn the trigger on. And we can try and drop it on another track. You can see it's responsive to any kind of transients, whether it be melodic or percussive, it doesn't matter. If there's changes in the audio, then it will react and respond. So yeah, you can use it as a subtle effect, or you can use it as a very dramatic and something that will encompass the whole screen. It's quite versatile, it's quite unusual, but hopefully you guys can get some interesting looks out of it. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the other 3 videos, which are Spectral 3D, Vertex 8 and Wave Viz, and I'll show you how to get different looks out of those. Thanks for watching, guys.